I was so small when the world first started to feel too big for my shoulders. My name is Emily, and this is the story of a marriage I never asked for, a union born, not of a heartbeat, but of a hollow stomach and a desperate necessity. I remember the air in our tiny kitchen. It felt thick, suffocating, the day my mother finally sat me down. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with a weary, gray exhaustion that seemed to sap the very color from the room. Her voice was heavy, a leaden weight that pulled at my spirit as she spoke the words that would end my childhood. "We don't have enough to survive," she told me, her hands trembling against the scarred wooden table. "I cannot feed you anymore. The only way out, Emily, is if you marry." The room spun. I was only 18, still clutching at the edges of my dreams like a child holding a fading balloon. I cried until my throat burned, begging her through a veil of hot, salt-stained tears. I pleaded with her to see me not as a mouth to feed, but as a daughter with a future. I told her I wanted to study, to see the world, to feel the wind of my own life beneath my wings. But her words were a cold blade that sliced through my protest with clinical precision. "If you don't marry Emily, then we will starve." In that moment, the girl I was died, and the wife I was forced to be was born. The wedding was a ghost of a celebration. There was no laughter to fill the rafters, no joy to brighten the dim corners of the room, and certainly no dancing. I wore a borrowed dress that felt like a shroud, cinched tight around a heart that had gone numb. My smile was a mask, a fragile, porcelain thing that threatened to crack with every forced breath. Beside me stood David. He was not the monster I had conjured in my nightmares. He was not cruel or unkind. He was simply a shadow. He was quiet, distant, and carried the weight of years I had not yet lived. When he looked at me, I didn't see the fire of a lover. I saw a man who looked like he, too, was carrying a cross he hadn't chosen. On our first night, the silence between us was a physical barrier, a wall of ice that stretched across the bedroom. I looked him in the eyes, my voice trembling but certain. "We may be married by law," I told him, "but I cannot be your wife. I cannot give you what you want." I braced for anger, for a demand, for the assertion of a husband's rights. Instead, he simply nodded. There was a profound, aching stillness in his gaze. "I understand," he said softly. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for me. He simply stepped back into the shadows, and from that night on, we lived under the same roof as ghosts, inhabiting different rooms and separate silences. Months bled into one another, marked only by the rhythm of shared meals where the clink of silverware was the only conversation. We were polite, painfully so, moving around each other like dancers who had forgotten the music. He would ask how my day was, and I would offer him one-word fragments, shards of a life I was keeping locked away. He would pass the bread, and I would thank him with a ghost of a whisper. We were strangers, sharing a tragedy. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the floorboards groan under his weight in the hallway. I would hear him pause outside my door, a long, agonizing hesitation before his footsteps would fade away. Sometimes, a sigh would drift through the cracks in the wood, a sound so heavy with loneliness that it made my own chest ache in sympathy. The town looked at us with a mixture of pity and mockery. We were the married couple who lived apart, a local curiosity to be dissected over fences and shop counters. They didn't know the suffocating weight of the air inside our home. They didn't see the way I was trapped in a cage of my own making, fueled by a resentment I couldn't let go of. Yet, in the quiet, I began to notice the small, unspoken languages of David's care. When a fever took me, I would wake to find a bowl of steaming soup and medicine left outside my door, placed there by a hand that never knocked. When I wept in the darkness, thinking my grief was a solo performance, I would find fresh flowers on the table the next morning, vibrant living things, in a house that felt like a tomb. I began to watch him from the periphery of my life. I saw him sitting alone on the porch, his eyes fixed on the distant stars as if he were searching for a map back to a home he had lost. I saw him smile at the children in the street, a soft, fatherly curve of the lips that held a world of untapped tenderness. I realized then that he wasn't my jailer. He was my fellow prisoner. The change came on a night when the sky decided to break. It was a late evening, the air thick with the scent of ozone and impending chaos. Thunder rolled through the valley like the drums of a coming war, and rain began to lash against the windows with a violent, rhythmic intensity. I sat in my room, my knees tucked to my chest, feeling small and terrified of the roar of the world outside. I whispered to the shadows, asking if this was all I would ever have, a life of silence. A house of separate rooms, a heart that was freezing solid. Then a knock, soft, hesitant, yet louder than the thunder. I opened the door to find David standing there, his shirt darkened by the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked vulnerable, stripped of his usual stoic distance. "Emily," he whispered, his voice catching, "are you afraid of the storm?" The lie died in my throat. "Yes," I whispered back. He stepped inside, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The silence was no longer heavy. It was electric, humming with the tension of things unsaid for far too long. He sat in the chair across from me, his hands trembling a sight that broke something deep inside me. "I don't want to scare you," he said, his eyes searching mine. I don't want you to feel alone tonight." The heat of him was a shock to my cold system. Before I could think, before my mind could talk me out of it, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was a desperate, trembling thing, at first, an apology and a question all at once. But when his arms wrapped around me, I didn't feel the cage I had feared. I felt a harbor. Stitching them together in the dark, we talked until the sun began to bleed through the rain clouds, laughing at the absurdity of our shared silence, kissing away the months of loneliness. The distance didn't just close, it vanished. From that night on, our life didn't just continue, it began. We chose each other. We traded the separate rooms for a shared life filled with the things we loved. I discovered the way he hummed to old music when he thought I wasn't listening. He discovered the way I saw the world in colors and began buying me canvases and paints without a word. Strangers became partners, and partners became lovers. The townspeople still whispered, claiming I had given in, but they couldn't have been more wrong. I hadn't surrendered, I had opened. David hadn't taken anything from me, he had waited until I was ready to give it. Today, our home is no longer a place of echoes and sighs. It is a place of loud, messy, beautiful life. We have children who run through the hallways where we once walked like ghosts. Sometimes, when the rain starts to fall, I look at David across the room, and a chill of what if runs down my spine. What if he hadn't knocked? What if I had stayed locked behind my own fear? I realize now that love isn't always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it's a slow, steady rain that fills the cracks in a parched earth until everything starts to bloom. It is about the patience of a man who knew that two broken hearts don't heal by being forced together, but by waiting for the moment they are brave enough to touch.